Okay, quick gut check. When you imagine starting your own thing, being your own boss, setting your own hours, answering to no one, what does that actually look like in your head? Because I want to tell you what one guest told me this week, and it kind of wrecked the fantasy for me in the best of ways. She said the business becomes your boss. It'll live rent free in your head at 3 o'clock in the morning. It'll wake you up at 5 and make you build the list because you know the list has to get built on top of everything else you already had to do that day. And I sat with that for a second because I think so many of us, myself included, daydream about the freedom part of building something of our own. And we skip right past that part, the part where the thing you built starts asking things of you. My guest today has lived that truth about as many times as a person can. She grew up inside a family business, built her own grocery store from the ground up the year before the economy crashed, then turned around years later and bought out 5 more stores from a former competitor, basically overnight. She opened up a second business right as COVID hit, and eventually she walked away from it all, on purpose. So today we're talking about grit, the unglamorous, unsexy, middle of the night kind, and about knowing the difference between digging in and holding on too long. Hello, and welcome back to ICMM, Living Life Unpaused, the podcast version. I'm your host, Abby Ventrilo. This week, we're back with a guest, and it's a really good one. Shannon Hoffmann grew up in an entrepreneurial family in Wichita. Her mom started their first business growing plants in the basement. And Shannon went on to study entrepreneurship at Wharton before coming home to work her way up from the cash register in the natural grocery store she'd watched her mom build. From there, she built her own grocery store in Kansas City from scratch, weathered the 2008 crash while still finding her own footing, helped her family more than double in size overnight by acquiring 5 competing stores, opened a second business in the middle of a pandemic, and eventually made the call to sell it all. This conversation is full of the stuff nobody puts on the highlight reel. Going to 10 banks and getting turned down by 9, keeping a staff calm when you don't have all the answers yet yourself, and knowing the difference between pivoting and quitting. If you've ever wondered what it actually takes to build something and then have the guts to let it go, this one's for you. Here's my conversation with Shannon Hoffmann. So I am so excited to have you. We've got Shannon Hoffmann joining us today. How are you, Shannon?
I'm great. How are you?
Great. Thank you for being here. So let's just jump right into it. And
Okay.
I kind of want to go back to the beginning of your journey. So in doing some research, I saw that you actually got a degree in entrepreneurial studies.
I did. I
So
did.
did you always know you wanted to start your own business?
So I grew up in a very entrepreneurial family. My mom started our first family business when my sister and I were very, very young. She actually started by growing plants in the basement.
Wow.
And then we got into wholesale greenhouse work, and my whole family got involved. My grandparents and my dad joined at that point. And then we got into what's called interior landscaping in the 80s. That's where you go into homes and offices and decorate them with plants, or like back then, atriums were really, really big. I grew up in an entrepreneurial environment. And what was great is my parents always included me in conversations and asked my opinion. And so business was very much a currency in my household. But did I know I wanted to do my own thing? Probably at some level I did. But I also thought, I was kind of one of those classic overachievers in school. So I had a chance to go study it at the University of Pennsylvania Wharton School of Business. And I thought, oh, okay, great. I got into a really good business school. Let's go see if I can learn even more. And so I ended up getting a degree in entrepreneurial management and marketing, which actually at Wharton is considered the fluff degree because everybody did finance and accounting and, mergers and acquisitions and all that fun stuff.
Hmm.
But I came to realize that what I learned in business school was great from a resource standpoint and building connections. But actually, opening a business, I learned just as much, if not more, from my mom. So, blending the two has been really interesting over the years and realizing where certain things apply and certain things don't. and also running up against a true blue entrepreneur, my mom, who's like, yeah, we don't need that. Let's just go. And so you learn to kind of find that balance along the way. So that was kind of a bit of my early on trajectory. My mom got into alternative health or into natural foods while I was at Wharton. And she called me one day and said, hey, I want to open a natural food store in Wichita, Kansas. And this was in the early 90s, way ahead of its time. And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay. And she said, well, there's a trade show in Baltimore and I can't make it. Can you train down and go for me and gather notes, gather contacts, and help me figure out what I need to do to open a store? And I'm like, Mom, I'm about to start my sophomore year of college. She's like, please, I need your help. So I literally jumped on a train, went down to Baltimore, went to the trade show, went to all the seminars, gathered information, put a big manila packet together, sent it home to her. And within 6 months, she was in the process of opening the first location in Wichita. So that's my mom, and that's probably my first introduction to entrepreneurship. So here I am at school learning how to write business plans and what have you, and she's just doing it. So she was very much fire, ready, aim. And at that point, I was a little more ready, aim, fire. And probably by the time we had worked together for 20 some years, we both kind of met in the middle, which was nice. But the point to that story was I started to see as I got further in and we started doing more projects in the last half of school that I wanted to be more hands on. I really didn't want to go to Wall Street as I originally thought I did. So I actually left with the entrepreneurial management and marketing degree and moved back home to Wichita to figure out what I was going to do next. And my mom said, okay, if you want to join, you've got to start at the ground. You need to be out on the registers. And so, literally, at that point, she had the store and we had opened a retail side for Tropical Designs, which was our plant business, side by side at that point. So, we had a lot going on. So, that's kind
Yeah.
of how the trajectory back to get involved with the family business started. And then there's a bunch of steps after that. But, that's kind of the history to that point.
So she made you work your way up in the store and learn every piece of the business then.
Yeah, she said, you can bring these skills back from school, but you haven't worked here yet. And that kind of became our motto anytime we brought anyone on board was we realize you're bringing an amazing skill set from where you came, and we can't wait to benefit from that skill set and for you to, learn more, but you've never used it inside our business. So you need to learn our business and see how the two are going to work together. So that was my first big lesson, I think, post college.
Yeah. So tell me about bridging then from the Wichita store and kind of learning your way up to opening the Kansas City store, which you did on your own. Is that correct?
Right. So we had the Wichita store and we actually started a syndicated radio show at the time because
Okay.
we were so ahead of our time that we realized we had to go out and educate people about what we were doing with Green Acres. And I had been taking some acting classes after 4 years of business school just to balance my brain. So my mom's like, well, let's do something with that. And so she called the local radio station. She's like, we want to do a radio show. And they're like, well, what type of radio show? I don't know, one that educates on health. So we literally put a news magazine format together. And that was back when people read books and still, had appointment listening. And that was back when the industry was still really building. So it was, we were able to interview Dr. Andrew Weil, Deepak Chopra, a lot of the original founders of the natural products industry. And it was such an amazing experience. And it put us on the map, not only in Wichita, but in the industry. And I'm telling you this because it's really what became the foundation that allowed us to grow to another market. Because we came up to Kansas City and put the show on KMBZ up in Kansas City. Before we ever had a store, we just said, let's syndicate. Didn't really know what we were doing, but let's syndicate. So when we came up here, got advertisers to support it, started to build a following, and then realized that Kansas City had an opportunity for a store, but we weren't quite ready. So we continued with the radio show for about 6 years. We actually had a .com business during that time. We wanted to sell vitamins online. So we tried that. We built that for a couple of years, sold that off to a business to business when the .com burst. So you can see there's a trend here of entrepreneurial stuff going on. Some worked, some
Yeah.
didn't. But the store stayed steady through it all and continued to grow. It just was a much longer growth than I think my mom originally had hoped. But it just took us, we had to really kind of build our base a bit because they didn't know who we were. And at that time, we were still educating on what is vitamin C, what is tofu, why would you want to come into a health food store? And we made it approachable by having the radio show. We made it fun and entertaining so people could just come in and partner with us and build a relationship with us before they ever even bought a product off the shelf, which was a really important part, I think, that became part of our mission as we grew. So to answer your question, when we sunsetted the radio show in, I think it was 2000, or 2002, I went and worked inside the industry for 3 years out in Denver. So I got a real insight to the backside. I worked for one of the trade show companies, and I had a lot of relationships with vendors at that point. And Green Acres had built a good reputation within the industry, even though we were one store in the Midwest. We always acted like we were just as big as Whole Foods. And so then I got the bug. I'm like, it's time for me to do my own. And so I moved to Kansas City. We had market studies done all around the city. We selected Briarcliff mainly for the partnership with the development company at that point, the lack of competition. And my mom did probably one of the biggest gifts she ever did. She said, okay, if you're ready, you're going to do this on your own. You're going to have the brand behind you and we will be there for support, but you have to learn every step of this. So I literally went to 10 banks, turned down by 9. I had built my business plan. I knew what I wanted to do. It was going to model after what we had built in Wichita, but it's a whole new market, whole new plan. And finally, the 10th bank took a risk on me. And so then I had to build the building. So I had to build a grocery store. I'd never built a grocery store. So we went through that process and then I hired all my people and we were a separate LLC, right? Because we all didn't want to risk the original one if I didn't do well with this one. There's outside forces that you don't know will come about, right? I opened in 2006. Well, what happened in 2007? The economy crashed.
Right.
That's where I earned my stripes. That's where everything I had learned growing up and even from Wharton came into play. Because until you go to bed wondering how you're going to make payroll, wondering how you're going to pay your vendors, that's when you build your grit. Because
Yeah.
every day you have to pivot and adjust and communicate and make your way through. And we literally built that store one client at a time because when the economy tanked, we weren't established and we had to really, be careful in how we built and be very conscious of all of the relationships we were building because these customers, they weren't easy to get and they weren't easy to get that loyalty. But we did, and we stuck with it. And then that became our solid second location. And then later on, we bought more stores and expanded.
I think you made a really good point there. You talked about, until you've built a business, you don't really know that you have to worry about how you're going to make payroll, how you're going to make rent, those types of things. How did you know that? Was that something that you learned through your mom's store or?
It was a combination of all of it. I had a couple of great mentors. And if you read every self help book out there and every business book out there, they all have mentors. Luckily, I had a good relationship with a person involved with the development company, and we would sit down because the development was new too, right? So we would sit down and strategize and say, okay, you're building the development, I'm building the store. What do we do next? What type of events do we need to do? And the thing that he really taught me was always communicate with your vendors. Let them know where you're at. The vendors will work with you as long as they know what's going on. So many people, when they get in trouble, go silent and they think, I'll fix this and then everything will be okay. It's okay. You don't have to tell them everything, but you have to give them a plan. So I might call a couple of vendors this week and say, I'm going to send you these checks and then I need to go pay some other vendors and I'll pay you, 3 or 4 weeks later. And then we had to go back to the bank. The bank actually called our note during that time because the economy was down. So, there were many nights that I didn't think we were going to make it the next day, but we just kept moving forward and kept towards the goal and towards the plan and partnering with everybody. I partnered with our distributor and said, hey, I have to keep building this business, but can I spread paying you out over time? And they worked with me on that. And I said, as long as I hit these benchmarks, I'm going to be able to pay you. And I knew payroll, of course, was first and inventory was second and everything else came after that. We literally built it 1 week at a time. And as we started building that core customer, then we knew we had a base to build from. And that's extremely important too when building a
How
new
did you
business.
Yeah, how did you kind of set yourself a part in that business? Because here you are, a health food business that is kind of up and coming around 2007-ish
Mhm.
timeframe, but you've got the economy that's not as great either. So how did you kind of build that core business with your customers?
We went back to what we knew, which was education. So we would host seminars, we'd bring local professionals in, we'd bring local wellness people in. So then we got exposed to their base, and then they knew they had a resource in the area. We launched some health tips on the radio because back then you still did traditional radio advertising. So I would voice health tips. So I tried to build ourselves as a resource within the community more than a grocery store, because a lot of what we did was supplements. And back then it wasn't heavy online, and people were under a lot of stress and they wanted to feel better. That was also, during the Dr. Oz years when he was talking about all these introductory supplements, and we'd get them through the door and then we could educate them from there. So we went back to who we were, which was educators and community builders. And so we would have community coffees, and I started a farmer's market and we ran that for 7 years. So that was a separate business almost within inside the business, but it was a way to build community and to connect us into the center, because not always are the things that you pick to do necessarily just going to drive money directly to your bottom line, but they will indirectly build your stability over time and feed your bottom line. So I think that was a piece that and then we had to just watch every cost and make some hard decisions. We also had a deli. And so, during that time, we would have a lot of affordable deals in the deli, and we tried to build our signature pot pies and things that people could pick up on their way home because they weren't eating out as much. So we tried to become, again, a resource for our community.
I remember going to the deli all the time for lunch when I worked at DST downtown. So
Yep. Yep.
I could attest to how good it was.
Awesome. I love hearing that. Yeah. Now that we're beyond it, that's the one thing I always hear is, oh, I miss your deli. Oh, I miss your deli.
Yeah, I do. So where did the business go from there after 2007 then?
So this is what I think happens to a lot of younger people, no matter what generation it is, right? When I opened that store, I wanted to open more. I had all these grandiose dreams, right? Well, it took us 10 years before we made our next move. And so that was a lot, right? But we had to, because if you don't build your base before you expand, you can easily implode. And so mom had her store in Wichita and I had this store in Kansas City. Of course, to the vendors, we were the same chain, right? I mean,
Mhm.
and we worked together. We shared, marketing resources. We had a co-op ad program that we all used. So we were running it like we were, two stores together. Then we had the opportunity. Here's another lesson. We had an opportunity to build our third store in Tulsa. So I had been looking for different areas to build, and we joined a development down in Tulsa. And this is a lesson about following the money, right? They promised to build it and pay for it, et cetera, et cetera. So all sounded great to us. We built the third store. I literally almost moved to Tulsa to get this thing built. But then when we opened, they weren't getting the rest of the center built. So we were kind of sitting there by ourselves. And a grocery store needs traffic and energy. It cannot be a destination. It's the central point of the community, right? So the developer got into some trouble and ended up putting things on hold, and we ended up closing that store. So that was a hard lesson for us and lost some money over that. We didn't have a lot invested in it, but when people offer to build something for you, you got to remember you're still the one operating the business after you open. So that was that lesson. But at the same time, we were pivoting, and my mom, and these are the lessons you just can't learn in school, right? My mom had always maintained a relationship with our competitor in Wichita. So there was a company called Whole Foods. It was not the big Whole Foods, but they had been around for 40 years and they competed with us. We always had a healthy respect for one another. And the owners were getting older and they had talked about selling, but my mom just would check in with them once or twice a year, see how they're doing. And unfortunately, the husband passed away actually in a plane crash. And then a couple of years later, the remaining owners decided they wanted to sell, and mom had been building this relationship over time. And so we had the opportunity to buy their 5 stores. So talk about accelerating overnight. We pivoted out of
You went from
closing the
2 to
third.
5
We
or
went from
to
3 back
7.
to 2 to 5 within the same time. So yeah,
Wow.
or to 7 with the original. Yes. And every one of those stores was different. Every one of them was different sizes. So it's like we got 5 different children into the family at the same time, all from different backgrounds. But mom had built that relationship over time. And so that was just an opportunity that we had and we couldn't pass it up. And so we took it. So that was kind of our next big acceleration. And we rolled it all up into one company at that point. My store went in, her store, everything went into one larger company. And now all of a sudden we're a much bigger company.
Yeah. How did that work? So, I mean, obviously, the Kansas City store you kind of built from the ground up. So you were able
Mhm.
to take what you had learned from your mom and some of the things that you had built in from that respect. What was it like taking 5 stores that you said were all different sizes, all different kind of models?
And we had competed with. So they
Yeah.
already had kind of an opinion of Green Acres, or customers had gone there that might not like Green Acres, and back and forth. But we always had a healthy respect for each other. And their mission was also education and making a difference. So we knew we aligned on that. Honestly, it was like drinking from a fire hose. And we literally had to break it down into pieces and deal with each piece at a time, right? So we couldn't be in 5 places at once. So we went immediately to setting up structure. So we started setting up daily meetings with the managers and covering one topic with all the managers every single day. It might be 20 minutes. We wouldn't overload them, and then trying to educate them and train them through that process while still running the stores. Then we had to lay out a whole plan of how we were going to remodel and rebrand them all to become Green Acres. So that was a whole backside project that had to happen as well. We literally started hitting the road and going around and getting to know them all, and to, figuring out who what strengths everybody had, how we could build on different people at the stores. I'm not going to sit here and say we were perfect at all. Oh my God. We made a lot of mistakes during that time. There was even 2 of the stores that still hand priced their bottles with the pricing guns. So they weren't even on a POS system. So we literally had to lay it all out and break it into pieces and figure out timelines of what we want to do and just go, right? You didn't want to have analysis by paralysis either, because we were still running the stores every day. Luckily, we didn't really try to make changes in the stores until we truly had a plan to do so. Now, their staff, of course, things moved around because we had a different way of running businesses and how we ran our teams and such. So, over time, we did turn some staff, but we also had a lot of people who were still with us when we sold in the end. It was a combining effort, and that's when we as a family had to really find our lanes. We couldn't all be involved in everything, so we had to kind of split up who was going to take what. And that was a learning for all of us because we'd always been very collaborative. We would be collaborative, but it would be very soundbite collaborative. Like, hey, this is going on, great. And then you'd go back to your lane. There was a lot of learning for us, and a lot of learning but kind of like I said in the beginning when I talked to the vendors about making payments, we did that with the team. We're like, hey, here, this is where we're at. We don't have the answers yet, but hang in there. We'll have something to you by next week. And in the meantime, do the best you can. We almost went back to the 4 agreements to approach every day. Do your best, be impeccable with your word, don't make assumptions, and don't take it personally. We kind of had to remind ourselves of that every single day because there was a lot of chaos and a lot of change going on. So bringing structure to that as quick as possible was what we knew might bring the stability that we needed.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think, especially when you have a new situation like that, people get scared and they
They
react
do.
from fear. And so
Yes.
then they start to make up their own stories when they aren't hearing from, the new owners and hearing about the new processes.
Yep.
I, th- I think a
Silence
lot of
breeds
people,
assumption.
yes, yes, definitely. So now you have 7 stores
Now we have 7.
and you also open your own business.
I did. Well, and we actually went up to 9. We actually acquired
Wow.
another one, but then we closed a couple, and then we closed some through COVID. So during that time, I relocated from Kansas City to Phoenix. I was driving back and forth from Kansas City to Oklahoma. I kind of took over running Oklahoma, and my mom, because there were 4 stores in Wichita, ran that. And we both worked on Kansas City together because it was kind of by itself up here. So, just personal reasons, I moved to Phoenix and then would fly back and forth to the locations because it was easy to get in an hour and 20 minutes and do what I needed to do, and then and go home on the weekends. I also had migrated into running the financials of the company and the marketing and kind of overseeing day-to-day operations alongside my mom on that. So while I was in Phoenix, I had the opportunity to open an IV nutrient therapy clinic franchise. At the time, I thought it would be on the side. But again, I'm learning as an entrepreneur, nothing is really rarely on the side, right?
Yes.
Unless you've got the resources to put leadership in place and you're really going to be a hands off person, and especially building a new business, you've got to have energy and available to be involved. And I kind of joke, and maybe this will take some of the credibility away from me in this podcast, unfortunately, is if I tell you I'm going to open a new business, run, because some economic thing seems to happen every time I do. Because 6 months after I opened that clinic, COVID hit. So remember, I opened Kansas City and the economy tanked. Then I opened my clinic and COVID hit. So I got my second big lesson in pivoting. And I was a brand new business in Phoenix, and I didn't have a network built like I did in Kansas City. And it was a medical business. And I learned really quickly as the owner, I couldn't step in if I had to make changes with the medical staff because didn't have the licenses. So I was learning a lot of lessons really fast again. And, we pivoted from just the core part of the business to COVID testing, to helping people who still had to travel or people who needed to go in and see immune compromised people. So we looked at what the environmental situation was giving us and how can we help. So that really carried us through. But it was really hard for me because there were a lot more demands in Green Acres at the time, because every aspect of our business got turned on its head, from supply chain to staffing to regulations to legal to everything. So I became an HR expert overnight. I became a law expert, legal expert. I was constantly drafting things to, new policies, when they had the 6 foot thing, or you had to wear masks, or all of those things. It was every single day from morning, noon, and night. So I pretty much went into running both businesses full time. I mean, of course, my mom was still running all of her part and overseeing everything, but just the day-to-day demands of what had to happen. And I think this is where a lot of entrepreneurs can really take a misstep. That's when you have to dig in. When things get harder, you have to dig in further. You can't step away. You can't be scared of it. You can't hand it off to anybody. You got to dig in yourself and figure it out and push your way through it and pivot. You got to be able to pivot and pivot quickly. You can't hold on to what you think things should be, or what your idea was, or what your dream was. If outside forces and environments change your direction, you have to go with it.
And I think you mentioned a very important part there, is that you had to step in and you were HR and you were the legal guru and you were the medical guru, and you had to be all things at once, even though you didn't have the experience in those areas.
No, because we, number one, as the owners, needed to create stability for our staff. They needed to know we were on top of getting the answers. If we were just waiting to hear back from an HR person or waiting to hear back from a lawyer, that silence breeds assumption. They would get scared and things. So we were constantly saying, "Hey, we're drafting this. We'll send it out the end of the day. Here's the temporary policy. We'll put a new one in at the end of the week. Here's how to handle concerns with customers. Okay, supply chain's on its ear. We're going to be out of stock of the." I mean, I was on the phone with the vendors constantly. Okay, where are we at with this shipment? Okay, I know this stuff is now going to be out of stock. And everything we were selling in the store stopped selling, and everything we weren't selling started to sell. And so that's what also flipped the supply chain, because everything was about keto at the time, and protein and no carbs, right? Well, what did everybody want when COVID hit? Comfort foods. What did we start selling? Bread, pasta, chips, everything that had gone down through the keto. And so those manufacturers didn't have endless supply, right? Toilet paper. That's why so many people had vacancies on their shelves, is because we were selling stuff that wasn't selling 3 months prior. So suppliers can't just manufacture that stuff overnight. So everything got disrupted all the way up the chains. And you really got to see through your supply chains who were solvent businesses and who weren't, right? Who had leveraged to a point that they weren't going to be able to invest to get inventory out quickly, or things like that. So it was quite a learning in every single aspect of our business. But what I was fortunate of is both of my businesses got to stay open during that time. So that was another side.
I would say, how did that change the landscape of how you go do business in the future then?
So I would say it's still sorting itself out to a large degree from COVID. I think it really showed us that you can never let one aspect of your business just kind of ride. You have to, especially in today's climate, you have to be aware of all the changes that are happening. Information is moving so fast, changes are happening so fast. If you can't grab it, make sure someone in your company is watching it. In the IV business, so I sold it in 23 to my clinic director and her husband, and she and I had built it for 4 years together and really, were able to get it as a solid business. And I was gonna move back because I knew we were gonna get close to probably selling Green Acres or needing to make some decisions on Green Acres, plus I wanted to be back closer to my family. And so what I learned through that process is how much change was already happening because now I'm back consulting with the IV business and the regulatory landscape is so different, right? They have to have now we used to be able to have paramedics, now we have to have nurses. Now they have to do these exams just to get an IV that they didn't have before. So, and we dealt with that in the grocery store, or I should say in the health food store, because supplements were always under fire. That the FDA is going to take them off the shelf. They're going to become regulated. But we just powered through until those changes actually happen. And some would get taken off the shelf, right? So we had to be involved with the lobbyists. We had to know what was happening in the industry. And I think at the rate of change that all industries are going through right now, you can't just wait and hope that it works itself out. You need to be either walking step in step or being a step ahead and be ready to pivot if you have to.
Yeah. So you mentioned, so you did end up selling the store. So talk about that
Yes.
process a little bit.
So we had the opportunity. So we actually had thought about doing it before COVID because there's always an opportunity to sell. I think as an entrepreneur, you have to go into it knowing you want to exit someday or that it's going to be a lifestyle business. There's a lot of them who just start it, build it, and not really have a plan. And that's a tough spot to be in because then when you might want to be ready to sell it someday, you may not, the business itself may not be ready to sell. But that's another discussion. But I think we knew we wanted to, but then COVID hit. So we had to double down. We were like, we don't know what the landscape will be after this. And it did completely change. So we had like 23 competitors open up against us in 3 years. We had gone from being the leaders to kind of having to go into defense mode, right? Because you had your natural grocers, your Whole Foods, your Sprouts, they were all expanding everywhere. So we stayed in our lane of education, independent stores, community, all of that. But we knew there was going to be a point. I kind of equate it with the hardware industry. You had all these independent hardware stores, and here came the Lowe's, and here came the Home Depots, and everybody. Eventually, the independents were kind of taken out or they were rolled up under Ace Hardware. And so I kind of saw our industry going in a similar we saw when I say I really am speaking my family, right? So we saw the industry going in a direction that it was going to be hard for independents if they didn't grow to stay sustainable cost buying, especially after COVID. Just the cost, every single item of our P&L went up insurance, utilities, transportation costs, gas fees being charged by your vendors, shipping fees, all of that stuff went up. And we work on a 2 to 4% margin in grocery. In our business, it's 1 to 3 in traditional grocery. It's 2 to 4 when you have supplements because they have a higher margin. So that just kept getting squeezed and squeezed. Plus the cost, that's when all the salaries started really going up and cost to pay staff and insurance and protection. So anyways, you get the point. Everything went up. So we knew there was going to be a point that either we had to get a partner to grow or go ahead and exit. And my parents were hitting a point that they were ready and post COVID. So we had the opportunity. We had signed on with a broker actually years prior and just kept in contact and kind of watched the landscape. And then we had the opportunity. There was a publicly traded company that was rolling up independent chains. And we were the largest one in the Midwest. And they were, of course, everything starts on the coast. So we had to be patient. They did some stuff on the East Coast and then they started working their way across the country. And we were ready, but we also were preparing our business for it. So we were making decisions that we knew would prepare the business to be there because we didn't know when it might happen. And then when it happened fast. It took us 8 months to get to the closing date because of the due diligence, especially because they're publicly traded. But we weren't caught, you know, leaning back. We were leaning forward to be in a position to sell.
So when you talk about the stores, so they were in several different locations, so you can't be everywhere at once. But this is also a family business, and I think
Yes.
you had talked earlier about how that kind of made you who you were. In fact, in the respect of, this is personal to your mom, and that's kind of how it started. How did you keep that with all these differences to make those stores also successful as Green Acres markets, and then get that to where somebody would eventually then want to come and buy it?
Right. That's probably one of the hardest things, and I would have to say I think we did it well. I don't think we did it amazingly well because we weren't. These stores had been around 40 years before we bought them, and they were in markets that we didn't live in. So, no, they
Uh-huh.
didn't know our family. They didn't know our presence in the community, but we did everything that we could to build the Green Acres way. Luckily, my parents and I were never the face on the floor. We always built through our teams. So we built through our managers and we built through our supplement experts. We built through our deli managers so that they became the face and the voice that built the community for each store. And then we would build our messages through our marketing. We had a newsletter that went out every month, and we always had education in there from us or messages from us. And when we did classes and things, we would record them and have them available. So, yes, if I'm perfectly honest, the store in Wichita always had probably the most influence of us, Kansas City second, and the others in Wichita because, our corporate headquarters were there. The ones in Oklahoma, they were strong, but they probably were more Green Acres than, the Hoffman family Green Acres. But we had quotes on the walls. I was in those Oklahoma stores a lot meeting with the teams, so they always had a presence of us there. And then I would do weekly budget calls with all the buyers from all the stores. It was tedious, but it was one of the keys to our success. We built a whole budget model, and we really were about empowering our teams to run it like their own business. So we would share financial information. We would ask their inputs. We would set them on goals and give them the opportunity to manage their budgets through the month. And then we would all get together and go through it. So we did what we thought was best. Could we have done better? Absolutely. Entrepreneurs will always feel that they could do better. It's part of the nature of being an entrepreneur, right? Then when we got ready to sell, I mean, that's why it took a while. We had a store that was 4,500 square feet, and we had a store that was 23,000 square feet. So it was not just a stampable model. They were buying the Green Acres reputation, the Green Acres ad program, the Green Acres team. What was so great, Abby, is we literally had our 30th anniversary right before we sold. And we did a commemorative issue in our newsletter and highlighted, my mom and the founding of it. And then I went through all of our staff and looked at who had been with us because you can get really bogged down by the tedious parts of the business. Like we were struggling with staffing post COVID, really for part timers, evening and weekend. You talk to any retailer, evenings and weekends and finding part timers is almost non existent. But as I built out our staff, at that point, we had about probably 80 to 90 people total. At one point, we were, 270, but we were probably at that at the end because we were at 5 stores at this point to sell. And we had people who had been with us 19 years. We had over half of our staff with us more than 5 years. Probably 60 to 70% of our staff had been with us over 5 years and had gone
Wow.
through COVID with us. So it was almost like this moment of, oh my God, how did we get caught up in all the challenges and the weeds? And we were all so grateful when we looked at that. And that's what we showed them when we were selling. You are getting a solid staff who are running these stores. We are giving them the structure to run them, but the customers know these people. And if you take care of these people, Green Acres will continue to go. And that's really kind of because we left when it sold, we didn't stay on. And we had built a general manager at that point over all the stores because we knew that had to be a key position because it wasn't going to be us. If it was all dependent on us as the entrepreneurs, you don't have a lot of value to sell because if you don't stay on and keep running it, then what are they buying? And that's a a really important lesson, I think, for entrepreneurs is you've got to build your team and you've got to have key people and people who are experts in certain people, right? You always hear the key
Right.
to a good leader is surrounding yourself by people smarter and more capable than you. So when it came time to sell, we had to kind of sell them on Green Acres as a whole. And I actually had to make a really hard decision before we sold because it was my baby. But we actually closed Briarcliff. It was not part of the sale, but it had been open, which is here in Kansas City. We had opened it. It had been open for 17 years, so it had a
Oh, wow.
really, really good run. It struggled coming out of COVID, right? The other stores were really coming back. Where it's located had a lot of offices, and actually, it was never in one of the top stores because of the density around there, right? Grocery works off of density, and they kept closing the bridge. And a large part of our business came across the bridge. So, again, external forces impacting your business, you have to be prepared to pivot with that. So we had to make that hard decision to close it because it was taking money and reducing the profitability. Broke our heart. We loved that store, but they were going to shut the bridge down for the big fix for 2.5 years. And our lease was up. And we just said, okay. And I called the broker and I said, I know this isn't great to close a store when we're trying to sell. He's like, you have to make the decisions that are best for your business. We can always show that going forward. So we did, and we closed it. And so when we went into the sale, we had
Okay.
five good, strong businesses that were, or stores that were producing.
What was it that made you want to sell at that point?
It wasn't about the mission anymore. It was a little bit about survival. It had gotten the competition, right? And I think
Mhm.
after COVID, we were pretty worn out, if I'm perfectly honest. And, my parents were reaching their 80s. And so, though, if mom was on this call, she'd be like, nope, I'd still be right there. I'd still be running it. So I was like, I'll retire for all of us, or I'll get out for all of us. So, and you'll hear that from a lot of founders, right? They want to keep going. There is always a time and a place. And we knew that that window would come. And if we didn't take it, it might not happen. So it came and we were ready. And so we leaned into it and it was a good deal for everybody.
So what did you do those first weeks after selling the businesses? You've now sold your IV clinic business and you've sold the 5 stores.
I slept peacefully. Because the thing
I
that,
can imagine.
when it comes to entrepreneurship, people, when I talk to them about it or I listen, people who want to start their own business, they're like, I want to be my own boss. I want to set my own schedule. I don't want to answer to anybody. I'm like, oh, you answer to the business. The business becomes your boss. It will live rent free in your head at 3 a.m. It will wake you up at 5 a.m. and make you go in and build that list because you've got to get that done along with the rest of your list and you got to grow it and you got to wear every hat in the business. So when we lost the energy to do that, I think is also when we knew that it was transitioning to a point that we wanted Green Acres to keep going. And so we needed to get out of its way a little bit. So afterwards, honestly, Abby, it's been an unraveling in many ways because you're going and going and going, especially after COVID. We were in such a survival, fight or flight, stay ahead, just to calm everything down. And what's interesting is we're in the business of wellness and natural products, and we still weren't the best at dealing with stress. So I think just allowing things to slow down for me, the best thing was to walk away the day we sold. I don't think it would have been great to stay on, but that's a decision for every entrepreneur to make for themselves, right? A lot of them want to stay on, make sure the transition happened. We did everything we could to build it to be ready to hand over. And I think mom would have stayed on had that role been there. But going into a publicly traded company, honestly, the top people are usually what's removed because we had a general manager in place and I was doing financials. They have a financial group already running their company. So we realized this was a true sale and we're walking away. Every deal is structured differently. Every deal will come out differently and every entrepreneur is going to have different feelings on it. There's no formula for that.
So now you've made another pivot. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So as I had mentioned, when I sold the Ivy business and moved back to Kansas City. The Ivy business is actually based here in Kansas City. And we had actually worked with the founder of it through Green Acres. He had the Evolve food company that was here in town. So we had carried his products in our store. So I've had a long relationship with him. And they're growing and they're expanding. And he really needed to bring on a franchise performance coach. And so I've joined part time with that to help them build that program. And it's been a really good learning all the way around. Of course, I have a passion for that business. I only sold it because I was moving back to Missouri. But and I like being on the cutting edge of things. When we started our stores, we were on the cutting edge. The IV business, peptides, functional health, that's all cutting edge now, right? You've got your biohackers and the whole new set of wellness leaders. This business is right there. So I really enjoy the challenge of that. And then I've been working with them to build their KPI system, their key performance indicator systems. So even though when I ended up in the financials in our company, which was not my favorite thing, but I took it on with passion and knew it was an important part of the business. Now it's kind of become something that's a default for me. So I'm pretty good at seeing patterns in the numbers. I think for entrepreneurs, so many times you think of the book E-Myth. I know it's an old book, but it really is true to life in the fact that if you're going to open a business just because you have a passion for the concept, you better make sure you've got everything around you, business support possible. So, their example is you love baking pies, so you open a pie shop. But the entrepreneur often grows to hate the business part, the accounting, the cost of goods, the purchasing, the staffing, the managing the landlords, all those parts and pieces. You have to learn to love the business aspect of running a business, or the business will drag you down, or you need somebody in the business who enjoys that part or is good at that to give you the support to be the passion of the business. And the best of both is when you can do both. There's a lot of people, it goes back to that. I want to run my own business. This is a great concept. I want to start, but they don't have any business background. And so you have to kind of start from square one. We have all different levels with what we're doing. And so we're building this system to help support them on the business side. And then also, to the point, data tells a story. If you can allow the data to tell you a story, it's not so boring, right? I love digging in and starting to see trends and be like, oh my gosh, it's going in this direction. Let's jump on that. Or this is a red flag, right? No, I don't like spreadsheets. No, I don't like to crunch numbers, but I do it and I try to find the joy in it. And so that's the thing as an entrepreneur. If there's parts of the business you have to do because you are the ultimate person at the end of the day, just find the joy in it. Find how it's going to be the piece of the puzzle that allows you to grow the business and do the parts that you really enjoy.
What do you think that you see people underestimating? Like you said, I don't want to, work for anybody anymore. I want to be my own boss. But what do you see that they underestimate the most?
Be honest, grit. It's not easy to run a business, and it takes a while to build a business. And if you think you're going to get there overnight, life happens, competition happens. You can have the best laid plans, but you have to be able to pivot, and you have to really rise to the occasion during the roughest times. And lots of times, if you've got other commitments, family, children, there's a lot of people who try to start something on the side while they have a full-time job. Anything that you decide to commit to, you need to give it as 100%, 110% of your effort if you want to get it off the ground, especially in today's world. There is so much change happening so quickly. For you to grab any piece of market share, you've got to be right there and know what's happening at every given moment, or you're going to be left behind. And also, I think not embracing the dollars. If you're afraid of the dollars, it will come and bite you if you're just running through money, or you don't know where you're at on revenue, or you don't know where you're at on your costs. That will catch up with you. So the grit is to dig in, even at the times where everyone wants to say, I'm starting my own business. It's so wonderful to be able to bring that up in conversation, right? What about the times after that newness is off, the honeymoon phase is over, and you're building the business and you're about to run out of money? That's the grit right there. And that's why a large percentage of businesses fail. The fear starts to set in. They don't know what to do. They start looking for answers and stop trusting their instincts or just their drive. And that's the time, I think, that really makes an entrepreneur. And being too attached to how it should be when you start, because if you have to pivot, you better pivot.
What would you say is kind of one of the best decisions that you made, especially with Green Acres, but then also with the IV Nutrition?
Decisions in regards to what?
I think you'd mentioned that it took you 10 years to grow, but you'd initially wanted to open up a number of different stores. Can you talk a little bit more about like why you decided not to immediately go out and franchise your stores even?
I think a big mistake that entrepreneurs make is they grow before they're ready, or
Mhm.
they grow before they have the financial resources. Working capital is, I've come to realize, is one of the key phrases in running a business. Everyone builds the budget up to the time you open, but nobody really plans for what it's going to take to get you to profitability. And so when the economy tanked, that store was not profitable for a long time. And we were not, and we're still family run, right? We didn't have big money behind us. Or, you'll see people who
Mhm.
will build multiple locations and then close the ones that don't work. That's when you get to the private equity level. But when you're building your own business, if you continue to expand because you think that's going to grow your business, it's not as fun, but you need to get to profitability before you expand. And that's really what happened, right? So we had to wait. We had to wait a long time to take that next step. And it wasn't fun, right? It was day to day. And entrepreneurs do not sometimes like day to day operations, the same thing over and over. Entrepreneurs like the newness, they like the growth and the passion and the vision. But that day to day is where you build your systems to be strong enough to grow. And that's the hard part. It's monotonous. It can be boring. It can be drudgery. It can be, you feel like you're just not getting anywhere or getting ahead. And then one day all of a sudden you're like, oh, this is working and it's changing. And then right then is when you actually need to slow down and keep it working so you know it'll work on its own before you expand. Because the minute you get that little light of, oh, this is working, and you go expand, you can take a pitfall too. Now, having said that, I think people can overthink things and not make decisions to grow because they get too many inputs, too much devil's advocate. What's my phrase? The more educated you get, the less risk you're willing to take because you keep learning how everybody else is doing it. So you do have to trust your own instincts and you have to trust your own drive. But that's the dance, right? That's the dance right in the middle of knowing when that time is right and surrounding yourself by good experts. Always want a good lawyer, always want a good accountant because they need to give you the facts of where you're at and you need to pay attention to it.
What would you say were kind of the biggest lessons you learned when you did have those additional businesses, the additional stores that you bought into?
There is a point where there's too much, right?
Mhm.
We worked our way through the 5 stores and then, as we continued to grow, but I mean, I think there were a lot of sacrifices along the way. I mean, we were working, I mean, we were in retail, we were working 24/7. I mean, work was our life for 10 years there. And yes, did I still have fun? Did I still travel some? You bet. But was it constantly on my mind 24/7? Yes. And there's a point where it's okay to say enough is enough and then wait for that spark to grow. Don't just keep running on a growth trajectory because that's what you think you should do or because you're kind of almost in a fight or flight nervous, I got to keep going mode. Do those self checks, do those gut checks of am I where I want to be? Is this, the path that I had planned to be on? And if not, what do I need to do to get back on that plan? Or hey, I think I might plan an exit in 5 years. That is not a failure, entrepreneurs. Just because you plan an exit, that is not a failure. And you do have to decide, is this going to be a business that I grow to sell or is it going to be a lifestyle business? And having a lifestyle business, there's nothing wrong with that. That means you're going to grow it to the point that it supports your lifestyle of whatever that level is. You might sell it someday. You might pass it on to your kids. You might just close it. There is nothing wrong with that as a path. But if you do have in your mind that I want to grow this and I want to sell it, then every decision you make along the way needs to be working you towards that because you never know when that opportunity is going to show up. Those are a few of the things I did learn at business school.
What do you think you underestimated when you did open the IV clinic, if there was anything?
I underestimated how much it needed from me in the beginning. It was an emerging industry. I still had to build a team. It was in an industry I didn't know, which was healthcare. Because when I said COVID opened, it wasn't just the clients coming through the door. I lost my staff overnight. They all got called back to the hospitals. They got called to the buses, and they were being offered money I couldn't spend. I couldn't pay them. So I had to pivot, and I couldn't step in. I think knowing your business before you open it and all the just being aware of the pitfalls, right? It was medical. So I could do everything in the clinic except I could not put an IV in. I wasn't licensed. So I had to have a staff member do that or I had to close for the day. So knowing the pitfalls that could significantly impact your business is really important when you're going in.
What would you say is kind of the one piece of advice that you would give to anybody that's thinking about starting their own business or, buying into a franchise?
Do your work on the front end of a deal. That's what my mentor taught me. Do your work on the front end. Do your due diligence. Go down those rabbit holes. Run the worst case scenarios because chances are those things are going to show up at some point. And it won't be a surprise, as much of a surprise. And you will be able to stay more calm and stable going through it. And trust your gut. If you run enough of those traps and it says, oh, this is so risky that what's that breaking point? Where is the risk for you worth it? That you don't lose your health and you don't lose your family. You don't lose the things that are important to you because at the end of the day, if your financial future is dependent on that and your family's future, you better be ready to dig in when the going gets tough. Now, here's the business school one. Make sure you have enough capital to start. Don't just go month to month. Don't go paycheck to paycheck on the business. Make sure you are well capitalized for surprises.
Anything you haven't shared that you wanted to share?
I think the beauty of entrepreneurship is it's going to be around no matter what stage of life the world's in, people are in. And if you really want to do it, I encourage you to explore it. But like I said, just do your work on the front end so you're not chasing it at the end and it no longer is a passion and a joy. And embrace the business side of it. It's just key. You are running a business. You might be running a pie shop or you might be running a supplement company, but you're still running a business.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you being here and doing this for
Well,
me.
this was great, Abby, and I love what you're doing with this, and I'm just very grateful that you asked me to be a part of it.
Shannon, thank you so much for being here and for being so honest about all of it, the good years and the really hard ones too. If there's one thing I keep coming back to from this conversation, it's that grit doesn't look like the highlight reel. It looks like the boring day-to-day stuff, answering the same question for the 100th time, watching the numbers, staying in it long after the newness wears off. And Shannon's right. Deciding to walk away from something you built is not a failure. Sometimes it's the most intentional thing you can do. So whatever you're building right now, a business, a habit, a version of yourself that you're still working on, I hope this gave you permission to dig in on the hard days and just as much permission to know when it's time to pivot. If you love this one, please share it with someone who's in the thick of building something of their own. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. I'll be here every Monday. And as always, it's just one intentional thing every day. Until next week, be careful out there.